Everyone, this is Sharon. Thank you for joining me. Today we're going to be talking about how you can fight cancer with your fork. And we have joining us today Karen Collins. Hi Karen, how are you?
Hi, Sharon. Great. Excited to be here with you.
Well, thanks for joining us. Karen is my friend, plus she's a registered dietitian and she's a nutrition advisor for the American Institute for Cancer Research. So we're going to talk a little bit about the strategies that you can try when it comes to your diet and lifestyle to prevent cancer risk. So Karen, my first question today is, how powerful is this connection between diet and cancer? I mean, do you have statistics on what percentage of cancers could actually be prevented with diet and lifestyle?
Well, they look at lifestyle, diet as a part of lifestyle.
Mhm.
And in the U.S., lifestyle choices we make every day can add up to prevent about 40% of cancers. So that's nearly 723,000 cases this year alone.
Wow, so it's pretty powerful then.
Pretty powerful, yeah. Now, avoiding tobacco is a crucial part of that. And the great news is that the latest figures are that nationwide cigarette smoking is the lowest it's been in decades.
Wow.
So that is fabulous. But now we need to move on and recognize that there's so much more we can do to reduce our risk of cancer. And moving more, being physically active and sitting less is one way that you can directly affect metabolic and hormonal influences on cancer development.
Hmm.
And then your choices in what you eat and drink are a big part of this lifestyle that reduces cancer risk.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the latest cancer risk awareness survey conducted by the American Institute for Cancer Research shows that less than 50% of Americans are aware of choices that can make the biggest difference.
Wow.
We
So
have
we
some
have to
talking to
get
do.
the word out, don't we?
Yes, exactly.
So in what ways does diet protect against cancer? What's going on in the food choices that we make that could actually protect us?
Well, your eating habits can help fight cancer development in three basic ways. First, as a source of protectors, relatively unprocessed plant foods, whole grains, vegetables, fruits, legumes, nuts, and seeds provide vitamins, minerals, and naturally occurring phytocompounds that support antioxidant and anti-inflammatory defenses and can affect carcinogen metabolism. So really protecting against cancer even beginning in the first place. And many of these compounds seem to influence expression of genes, helping to turn on tumor suppressor genes, for example.
Mhm.
And then these plant foods also provide dietary fiber, which is supported by strong evidence as part of reducing cancer risk. Different types of fiber offer different kinds of protection. For example, sometimes support the microbes in our gut that seem to have protective effects.
Mhm.
That's just one aspect of diet to reduce risk. Second, eating habits that reduce cancer risk means limiting how often you include foods and drinks that pose risk. Now, fortunately, while there are some of these things that many people consume frequently, the list isn't as long as what many people fear. And
Mhm.
then third, eating habits that reduce your risk of cancer should help you to reach and maintain a healthy weight and avoid undesired, unintentional weight gain, which is really about keeping a healthy level of body fat. This
Mhm.
isn't about appearance or trying to reach some kind of weight that's not healthy or that's unrealistic for you. It's because research is now quite strong that excess body fat is linked to a greater risk of at least 12 different cancers. And these unhealthy levels of body fat can lead to inflammation and hormonal and metabolic changes that can promote cancer development. So influence on weight is part of what makes
Mhm.
eating habits healthy if they're helping you to stay at a healthy weight too.
Wow. I mean, that it really highlights how important diet is based on what you're just telling us. And it also, you're also talking a lot about a plant-based diet, which, I'm really in
Yes,
support
indeed.
of, and a lot of things that you talked about are found in plant foods, which is probably why, the American Institute for Cancer Research has been very supportive of eating more plants since the beginning. I feel like they were ahead of their time. I can remember the diagrams that they would say, this is what your plate should look like. And they were talking about that before other people were talking about that. So what are your feelings in terms of that overall plant-based diet when you look at these recommendations?
Well, yeah, clearly the recommendations, and there are 10 basic recommendations that are part of what AICR has identified as having the strongest evidence to help reduce cancer risk. Clearly, the ones about eating habits are talking about making relatively unprocessed plant foods the stars of your plate. Now, um, the evidence shows a wide range of options for doing that. So some people might do this with a plants-only diet, others with some other form of vegetarian diet, and others with a more Mediterranean or flexitarian style eating pattern that includes modest amount of meats. Um, but clearly whole grains, vegetables, fruits, and pulses like beans and lentils each offer unique cancer protective potential, so they all warrant a place on your plate. And the AICR website, actually, aicr.org, includes a food facts library that provides the big picture on current research about many of these plant foods that people might hear about in headlines and want to hear what the kind of the big picture scoop is.
Yeah, I love that part of the AICR website. If you haven't visited it, go check it out because you can look up all the different foods and they have some science background. And Karen's written a lot of wonderful blogs and all sorts of information there. So if you ever have any questions about cancer and diet, AICR is a great place to go. So we will definitely include that in our show notes today too.
Great,
So,
thanks.
in a nutshell, what would your plate look like if you were trying to build this plate that were a cancer fighting plate? What kinds of foods would I see on that plate?
Well, a key recommendation is getting these foods with protectors. So that would mean whole grains, vegetables, fruit, and legumes like beans and lentils as a major part of eating habits. So often we might make this happen at one meal. Maybe it's dinner, maybe it's breakfast, but we need to make this the way our plates look throughout the day for all our meals and snacks. So it just really means making those foods in an abundant, really, like I said, a star of the plate, and looking for if there are some very highly processed foods, um, whether it's donuts and cookies or chips or something like that that you eat not just occasionally but really several times a week, then look for how you could swap those out for a healthier option, like some of the tips and recipes that you showcase so often on your blog or in your plant powered books, Sharon.
Hmm. Yeah, I like what you said about making sure those eating patterns are throughout the day because in my experience, a lot of people talk to me about their diet and their goals and dinner. Sometimes they're really nailing it because it's easier to plan this healthful dinner with a variety of plant foods. But sometimes lunch is on the go or breakfast, you're just eating something as you run out the door, and it's harder to get that plant forward plate. Do you have any tips for things like breakfast and lunch to try to create that more wholesome plate that would have more whole grains, fruits and vegetables, pulses, those kinds of things?
Well, I think first of all, it's the foods that you enjoy. And so really thinking about what options appeal to you, if it's hot cereal, cold cereal, if it's smoothies, if it's less quote unquote stereotypical breakfast food, if it's more like wraps and tortillas and stuff like that. And then so much of it's really the problem is not that people don't like it. In fact, many of the people I talk to say, "Oh yeah, I love that," but the problem is they don't have it often. The problem is because of not having stuff on hand, and
Right.
so it really becomes an issue of keeping your cabinets, keeping your freezer stocked so that you can really quickly all these things, again, thinking about all the recipes you've got on your website and your book, Sharon. These aren't, you can do something that takes like 3 hours to make, but that's not what this is. You can do it very quickly. It's having the foods on hand and then having a few of your favorite ideas um, kind of ready. So, generally when people are rushed, that's not your time to be creative. So
Yeah.
I always suggest that people have like a few um, go-to standards, and they have them if they need to have them on a list, in the cabinet or on their phone or whatever, for a bowl that combines whole grains and vegetables, or a way to do a wrap or a salad or whatever. It's
Mhm.
personal, but as long as you've got those plant foods handy and you have some good flavoring, it's quick and it's delicious.
Right. It's true. People have to have some go-to ideas because you're always going to have that really busy night during the week that's especially busy, even busier than you think it's going to be, and then all your, goals for healthy eating go out the window. So those are some great tips. I know right now one of the things I'm really into right now is sheet pan meals. I don't know if you've tried those,
Oh
Karen,
yeah.
but they're just on my busy nights. I just take whatever vegetable I have in the refrigerator, put on a sheet pan, open a can of beans, put that on a sheet pan, and then I cook up like a whole grain while my sheet pan is roasting. But I just basically put that on the sheet pan, drizzle a little olive oil and some herbs, roast it in the top rack until it's brown and caramelized while the whole grains are cooking, and then that's our meal, and it's just so delicious.
Yeah, and what can beat that the delicious flavor of oven roasted vegetables is
Yeah,
fantastic.
it's so
I
good.
live in a different climate than you do, Sharon, and so right now here in the north, one of my go-tos at this time of year would be soups. But
Yeah.
again, same concept is you can take whatever vegetables you have, leftovers from other meals that week, stuff from the freezer, put it all together, and you can have your whole grains, your beans, your lentils, um, veggies, and just have fun. And then that's where I think the spontaneity can come. If you have those basic ingredients, then you can be spontaneous and say, oh, am I in the mood for something sort of cumin and curry, or am I in the mood for something um, basil or rosemary, or am I in the mood for lemon and oregano, or
Yeah.
something spicy from south of the border, whatever
Hmm.
flavor you have. If you've got the stuff, that's the easy part,
Yeah,
having those other ingredients ready to go.
that's great. So, talking a little bit about the recommendations that you've already been sharing with us, would they be the same for people who've already experienced cancer? So, if you've already had cancer once and you're, really like doing whatever you can to keep from developing a recurrence, or cancer to come back again, what would these be the same strategies you're talking about?
Yes. Now we have to recognize that people who have had cancer face multiple nutrition concerns, sometimes certainly during treatment, and sometimes afterward. And so that is important, um, for someone who's in active cancer treatment. Um, Sometimes it's worrisome if they feel like this is super important to follow these recommendations right now. It can be really helpful for some people during treatment, but it's not for everyone. Sometimes the side effects of cancer or treatment make other aspects of diet a higher priority.
Mm-hmm.
Now, once the active stage of treatment is completed, AICR does advise cancer survivors to follow these recommendations if they can, unless they're for some reason advised otherwise by their personal health care provider.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. So I also wanted to ask you to take a little bit of time and dispel some of these myths and common misbeliefs when it comes to cancer. I'm sure you hear them all the time. So maybe you could just talk about some of your top ones that you want to get out in the open
Off
right
my desk, huh? Okay, yeah. Yeah, there are a lot. Unfortunately, the disadvantage of this age we live in, where there's so much great information available, is that there's also a lot of just blatant misinformation or misinterpretations of research that are out there, and that makes it really hard for people trying to find a good answer. Um, but I guess actually the first misconception that rises to my mind is that far too many people still think that cancer risk is largely hereditary, that it's just something you inherit and there's nothing you can do about it. And actually, of course, there are a few cancers that have a really strong inherited sort of cancer gene, but that's only about 5 to 10% of cancers. And even when you see cancers, quote unquote, running in the family, Often it can reflect that within a family we tend to have similar eating habits and lifestyle patterns. So it's not always that you are genetically, set to develop that cancer.
Mhm.
And it's important to know that even with a family history of a particular cancer, eating habits and lifestyle choices that can influence whether cancer actually develops or not. So
Yeah.
lifestyle isn't 100% of our cancer risk, but to just ignore it is ignoring a chance to make a substantial difference in your odds of developing cancer.
Yeah.
So then as far as, the misconceptions or myths about what that eating might be, one common misunderstanding involves sugar. This is really complicated. Most Americans eat and drink too much sugar. That is just true for health overall.
Mhm.
But research doesn't show that avoiding all sugar, like, going through and looking for every single gram of sugar in something, research doesn't show that that's going to make a difference in cancer risk. Um, Big amounts of added sugar can lead to surges in insulin levels, and that does seem to stimulate cancer cell growth.
Mhm.
But probably even more importantly, these foods and drinks are often really concentrated in calories, making it harder for you to maintain that weight, the body fat level that we talked about, as actually being quite a crucial factor in the risk of many cancers.
Mhm.
So it is smart to look for ways to cut back on added sugars, both for many aspects of health, um, but really focus on the most concentrated sources of added sugars. And certainly, this does not mean that you should worry about fruit. I've heard of people even being afraid to eat fruit because they, know that fruit has a natural sugar.
Yeah.
Fruit is loaded with healthful fiber and a variety of nutrients and phytocompounds. Fruit is part of an eating pattern that helps to reduce cancer risk. It is certainly not something to be afraid of.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good one. I hear that sugar one all the time. So I'm glad
Yeah.
you got that. Are there any other myths that you really think are important? I know there are a lot of them, but maybe one more that you'd like to get out there and clear up.
Well, I guess in the, kind of the opposite side of the one I talked about, where people are thinking like, oh, it doesn't make a difference, it's all in the genes. The other side is people putting so much emphasis on nutrition and thinking that nutrition has to be perfect to make a difference.
Right.
And since very few of us have perfect eating habits, that can make it seem like nutritional supplements are what you've got to do if you want to lower cancer risk. Um, Often it's because people think it takes super high levels of fruits and vegetables to protect against cancer, for example. Um, but even for nutrients that support our antioxidant defenses or have other cancer protective potential, that idea, sort of the more the better, is actually not true at all. There is some evidence that it is possible to get too much of a good thing. So
Yeah.
the really important message says that achievable amounts of nutrient-rich foods, swapped especially as replacements for foods that are lower in nutrients, that does lower cancer risk. And besides that point, when you choose to do this, to get these nutritional compounds and other benefits from foods, then you're getting all these nutrients and phytochemicals that bring a whole range of protectors, most likely by working together against cancer development rather than trying to pick out one or two or 10 as being the things you're going to count on.
Yeah. I like that you mentioned that, because I do see that, that people just, they just really take it to an extreme, what they're trying to do with their diets. And, they have their heart in the right place, but it may not be, beneficial in the end. And for example, juicing is something that I've heard people say that they're actually juicing to try to fit all of these servings of fruits and vegetables in their day, because they feel like they can't get them by eating them in their whole form. So could you comment a little bit about your thoughts on juicing when it comes to this idea, well, I can pack in all of these, servings in one glass?
Yeah, I mean, there's several reasons although as you said, it makes sense at first glance, healthy foods, why not get more? But first of all, the evidence doesn't support that it takes that much to reduce your risk of cancer. We see very clearly when we look at population studies, the biggest difference is between the people who include very few, and there are many of those people um, in our population, and the people who just are getting like 5 servings a day, 5 small servings, like 2.5 cups a day. That's the biggest difference. And then, of course, if you can include more, cancer risk does go down a little bit more. But that puts in perspective that when you think you've got to get like, you know, 15 cups a day or something, there's just no evidence to support that.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is that although fruits and vegetables are a valuable part of this, eating habits that reduce cancer risk, it's not just fruits and vegetables. I mean, whole grains supply a different group of compounds, different nutrients, different types of fiber, pulses like beans and lentils, soy foods. These provide another group, nuts and seeds. And so you want to include all those. And so it is much more than just fruits and vegetables. And
Mm-hmm.
then third, what else are you eating? If if you're juicing, most studies suggest that when everything you have is liquid, it really doesn't hold your appetite very long.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're having these big juicing things, but then you're hungry 2 hours later, um, and then what you're doing is, getting something that's not such a nutrition all-star, it's maybe not overall supporting your health as much.
Yeah, that's a good point too. You touched a little bit on soy, and I get so many questions on soy. Could you just set the record straight on soy and cancer risk really quickly for all of us?
Sure. The fear, the concern and questions that most people have about soy are because of the compounds called isoflavones that are in soy. And this is a compound that is called or referred to as a phytoestrogen, a plant estrogen. And I've heard it said that the person who coined that term later deeply regretted ever coining that term for how misunderstood it is, because that means that these isoflavones have a chemical structure that you can see when you look at diagrams has strong similarities to human estrogen, but it doesn't function the same way. And what we know in research that's, early research was conducted in animals, and now we know that those animals don't metabolize those compounds the same as humans do. So we have much better evidence now than we had 20 years ago, and it's unfortunate that the same fears, like once you get a fear, it's very hard to get people to forget about it. And the evidence now is that it's not, some evidence suggests that soy may help reduce risk of some of the estrogen-related cancers. Others suggest that it isn't protective, or at least that if it's protective, it needs to be at a time when the breast tissue is still developing, so maybe in adolescence or before a first pregnancy, but that it doesn't pose risk. It's just a question of is it or is it not particularly protective.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, as a healthy protein source, as a replacement, because we know that excessive amounts of meat, or including processed meats like bacon and sausage and things like that, regularly increases risk. And people say, well, what else am I going to eat instead? Well, then, tofu and edamame and tempeh and things like that become a great choice of something to eat. Um, so a great choice to include. It may or may not actually reduce risk of cancer, but it certainly fits. And even in studies of breast cancer survivors, consumption of um, 2 to 3 servings a day is considered safe. It's been well documented. That high a consumption is really not very common in the US, but we look at Asian studies where those levels are very common, and it's clearly safe.
Yeah.
So, and some evidence suggests for breast cancer survivors may even reduce their long-term risk of overall mortality. So that may reflect actually heart disease, not breast cancer recurrence. We don't know. But again, bottom line is all those fears, not something to fear. Feel good, comfortable, including soy foods in your eating patterns.
Well, thanks for clearing that up.
Sure. Now that's different than jumping into like super consumption from, um, using those things as supplements or whatever. We don't have data about super elevated consumption, um, but in consuming, like I said, 2 or 3 standard size servings of soy foods a day is safe.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for clearing that up.
Sure.
So, what do you have any other bottom line tips, the really hard hitting tips on, fighting
Bottom line. Well,
that? And then also
um,
I wanted to know
yeah,
what are your favorite, like any resources or anything that some of your favorite expert resources and guides, that people could find online. So if you could share those as well.
well, first of all, I think the one really important thing again is dealing and recognizing that we're in this time of information overload and so much headline hype that making good choices really does mean you have to be um, picky about the sources you trust and not just soak up everything that comes across your screen. So it's best to make your choices based on recommendations and reports from trusted authorities like AICR, not trying to bounce back and forth from individual single studies or what your neighbor says. When headlines catch your attention, I would really encourage people to go to the AICR website, AICR, that's the American Institute for Cancer Research, AICR.org, and you'll find kind of responses or the big picture on some of these individual studies that are making headlines.
Yeah.
And then secondly, multiple studies show that the closer people get to the whole package of recommendations to reduce cancer risk, the more powerfully they protect themselves against cancer. What's super important is that it's not all or nothing. It's not about eating perfectly. It's about gradually finding choices that are realistic for you. So
Mm-hmm.
each step closer to the recommendations makes a difference. And whatever you can make work in your life, you can feel really good about the fact that you're making a difference.
That's great. And also what's good for cancer protection is also good for the whole body, right? It's not like we're offering suggestions that aren't good for the brain and the heart and to prevent high blood pressure. All these things work together, right?
Yeah, more and more we're finding the connections, early on, and some people's kind of focus still tends to be on, carcinogens and avoiding carcinogens or something. Now we really, more and more evidence is looking at cancer as another metabolic disease that's very much influenced by a whole range of metabolic processes. And the concerns about heart health, the seeking to keep a healthy brain, many of these processes intersect. And so that is the good news, is that you don't have to, think like, well, how do I eat for my blood pressure? And then how do I eat for lower cancer risk? It's finding, a way of eating that actually is good for all of you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Karen. Are there any other sources that you want to recommend? I know you mentioned some at AICR. Are there any other places? Karen has a beautiful website too. We'll make sure to include that in our show notes. I'm sure you have
Well,
lots
thanks.
of great advice and information about diet there as well for people.
Yeah, I try to provide the backstory again, for people who see stuff in headlines and you try to make sense of it and want to see it in the big picture. So that's kind of what people can find on my website, which is KarenCollinsNutrition.com.
Right.
I think for people who are dealing with cancer, or are cancer survivors, is a kind of a special niche too. And AICR does have not only information about prevention and reducing risk, but also survivors. Other survivorship information can be found by the Oncology Nutrition Dietetic Practice Group of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. So that's oncologynutrition.org. And there are, there's really good information there for people who want some help as they navigate the road of cancer survivorship.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Karen. This has been wonderful. I'll make sure to include all of these recommendations in the show notes. So make sure to check out the blog that goes along with our interview. And we've got lots of information for you to access when it comes to loading your diet with foods that will help protect you against cancer. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Karen, for being with us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Great to be here.
Yeah, great. And this has been Sharon reminding you to eat and live well.